This shirt does not work well for a microphone.
You know, we're just gonna pretend that works. I think it does. Hopefully it does. Hopefully there's not like a bunch of clinging. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today. And for this video, we are going to be doing my June wrap up. First, before we get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what was the best book you read in June. Let's talk about it. Let me start by saying, before we even get into my stats, that this is probably the best reading month I have had ever. Honestly, I read 20 books this month, and across those, I read about 5,672 pages. I will openly admit right now that that is likely due to the fact that on my genre breakdown, I read 10 graphic novels. Thank God for those. My average rating for the month was about 3.96 stars, so a pretty great reading month overall. I did unfortunately have one DNF, however. For the rest of my genre breakdown, I read 1 romance book, 3 fantasies, 1 nonfiction, 3 contemporary, and 2 historical fiction. There is no fun layout this month. We're just going chronologically by when I read these books. First up is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir, and I buddy read this with Dasha over at Mythic Pages. I'll put a link to her right here. This was actually the pick for the Star Wars readathon, which I partook in May. After reading this, I can definitely see why this was picked as the group read for Star Wars, because this plot kind of feels like Star Wars meets Hunger Games mixed with the video game of Prince of Persia. I didn't really know a lot about this going in, so I'm going to give you guys the same synopsis that I knew. This story is following 2 different people who are both working to bring down this empire. One is working from the inside, and the other is a part of a rebellion who is trying to infiltrate said empire. This book starts with a kick in the teeth. It goes hard really fast. I was very impressed with how dark this got for being a YA fantasy. Shockingly, even though this is a dystopian society, I didn't mind it. I was actually very invested in it and wanted to know more about the world here. I think what is showcased is a bit sparse, but I am very intrigued to see more of it, and I can't wait to see it built out in the future. Although I enjoyed most of the dark elements in this, I was a bit uncomfortable with how often rape was utilized as a fear point for the female characters and how quickly it would be brushed aside like nothing. That wasn't a big fan of that. As I mentioned, this has the 2 perspectives of Laia and Elias. Unfortunately, very early on, I knew Laia was not going to be a new favorite character for me. She's not quite a damsel in distress, but she is right near it, and I just don't enjoy that. She did start to develop as the story went on. She would eventually start taking bigger risks, but even when she would do it in really dumb ways, and I ended up yelling at my audiobook quite often. Last 50 pages, she shifted from dislike to like territory and actually kind of had a bit of a backbone, and I was enjoying her perspective a lot more. On the opposite side, we were following Elias, who is inside this empire and is being trained to be a mix of a trooper slash assassin kind of thing. He was much more fascinating to follow. He is expected to do all of this violence onto people and not have a second thought about it, but in reality, he just can't stand the amount of blood that is on his hands, and I loved seeing that mindset from him. On top of that, his mother is a no good, terrible, awful person, and the interactions between them, I wanted so much more of those because they were fascinating. This relationship dominated every other one that was taking place in the book because I just wanted to see the weird dynamic that was happening between the 2 of them because they are so different while also being mother and son. Unfortunately, I do think one element of this story that did not age well and showcases when this was initially written is the romance, and it is cringy. I could not stand it. Honestly, I wish the portions of the story that were dedicated to the romance had instead been given to the fantastical elements, which were pretty sparse in this, but I was much more fascinated by those and I wanted to know more. Overall, the plot was definitely my favorite part. I was very interested in the rebellion. I wish we had seen a little bit more of it, but I'm sure we're going to in the future. On top of that, the political aspects and the intrigue there, I was hooked. I can't wait to see where that's gonna go. If you can't tell by everything I've been saying, obviously I am planning to continue this series. Dasha and I are actually planning to buddy read the rest of it if we enjoy it and decide to continue. For this one, I ended up going with 4 stars. Next up, I read Nick and Charlie by Alice Oseman, and this is a novella focusing on the 2 main characters of her graphic novel Heartstopper. In this, they are actually a little bit older. Nick is going to college here soon, and unfortunately that is causing some tension between the 2 of them. They are planning to try and be long distance, but due to some miscommunications, drama happens. Unfortunately, I was not a big fan of this. It just felt very teenagery. Again, tons of miscommunication. As someone who is in a long distance relationship for all of college, I can tell you one of the most important aspects of continuing the relationship is to communicate. I was a little frustrated with how this entire story laid out. I still enjoy getting to see these boys and see them grown up a little bit, so 3.5 stars. Also by Alice Oseman, I read Heartstopper, and all of this is just the sweetest, fluffiest, most adorable graphic novel. This is following Nick and Charlie as they come to terms with their feelings for one another and how their relationship develops. It's so sweet, it's so fluffy, it's so wholesome. But with that, the later volumes actually start to dive into some bigger topics. Not to say the earlier ones don't. Probably why I enjoy the later two more is because there is a bit more substance in them. Still, overall, these are so adorable and sweet, very pure. I really recommend everyone should read these. You can read it for free on Webtoon or Tapas, and I'll put links to those in the description down below, so you will go read it. I gave this series 4 stars overall. Next up, as a part of the Queer Lit Readathon, I buddy read with Rye at Rye's Reading Corner, who I'll link right here, All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, and this is a memoir / manifesto by the LGBT+ activist. This is just a beautifully done story in which Johnson shares their experiences, their happiness, their grief, their trauma, and showcases how such things have built them up to who they are now. And even if you can't relate with them, their writing is so well done where it is incredibly easy to sympathize with them to the point where it feels like you're empathizing. Specifically, the chapters revolving around Johnson's family members would all just, my heart soared, but at the same time, they were oddly bittersweet in different points. I ended up tearing up quite often at those. I greatly appreciated their highlighting of the importance in having a support system, whether that be your family by blood or your family by choice. Overall, this is just a absolutely extraordinary work of exploration when it comes to your identity, your gender, your sexuality, and just the experiences you live through as you grow up. I really recommend listening to the audiobook of this one. It is narrated by George M. Johnson themselves, and it is fantastic. I gave this 5 stars. Also, for the Queer Lit Readathon, I read Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi, and this was the group book. This is following a girl named Ada who believes she has these obanajis, I think is how you pronounce it. I will put it up here on the screen, which are maybe not demons, but like evil god things living inside Ada. And we follow Ada as she grows up and the experiences she has with these different obanajis within herself. May I just first say, I don't think this book was for me. I just had a very hard time connecting with the story, connecting with the characters. It was difficult for me to really comprehend what the ending point was. There's just so many layers to this story, and it's told in a very unique way to the point where I just kind of had a hard time keeping up with it. There's lots of imagery and symbolism throughout. There's also alternating perspectives and object pronouns, which again just made it very difficult for me to read the story. I was listening to the audiobook of this, and possibly I would have had a better experience if I had read it physically or in ebook form. I do think specifically this was a very interesting story in looking at trauma, and I learned a little bit about Nigerian lore with this. I just had no investment with Ada overall. This entire book definitely felt character-based. I still don't really know who Ada was in terms of a character. Like, I didn't really understand what was her personality, what was she truly like, because it felt like so often we were seeing her personality in terms of the obanajis that lived within her. I did see a lot of reviews talking about this in terms of dissociative identity disorder, and I don't know if that quite fits what's happening here, because the obanajis do feel like more than just these alternating personalities, but I don't know how else to explain them at the same time. Throughout the story, we are watching Ada as she deals with the trauma she was subjected to, but at the same time, she also struggles with who she is as an individual and her gender, as well as her sexuality at different points, also who she is as a daughter, as a spouse, as a sister. It just felt as though there was a lot happening in the story. It was juggling a little too much, and nothing had enough depth for me to really feel like I came away with anything. I just had a very hard time reading this in the end. I don't think this was the book for me. Possibly someone who thinks more critically about what they're reading would enjoy this more than I did. I didn't want to give this 1 star, but I gave it 2.5 because the unique writing style is really interesting. Not something I'd ever seen before, even if I did have a pretty hard time following it. After that, I read the entirety of Fence by C.S. Pacat and illustrated by Joanna the Mad. I did an entire reading vlog for this, and yes, it is spoilery, but I have a spoiler-free review at the end of that video, so go watch that over there. After that one, I read One to Watch by Stayman-London, and I read this as a part of romance-a-thon. I'm gonna be completely honest. I probably talked about this book twice as much as any other book in that video, so I'm gonna point you in the direction of that video right here. This was not for me. Somebody who likes The Bachelor would probably really enjoy this. I, however, do not. Next, a actual review. I reread Check Please by Ngozi Ukazu. I'm only gonna hold up the first one here, but I did reread both of the volumes and I loved them. This is a graphic novel series in which we are following Eric Biddle here, who has recently gone off to college and joined this hockey team. Unfortunately, he is terrified of getting hit because although he's played hockey in the past, really he was more of a figure skater. He also loves to bake and is trying to juggle finding a place for himself on this team while also trying to figure out how to improve his hockey abilities, and then a little bit of a love story. Also, I'm trying to not spoil this a ton, but guys, I love this. Another very sweet, wholesome, sappy, happy graphic novel that I will recommend to everyone to read. I have recently heard some people discuss that this is a bit more of a sports graphic novel. Personally, I don't really think it's very strong in this, but I do understand how that can sort of alienate some people if they don't really care about sports at all. Personally, I actually enjoyed learning about the whole hockey culture that takes place in the story. I also really loved that in the physical graphic novels, you get to see the early issues in color, whereas if you read them online, they're all in black and white. This is also episodic and not a continuous story, so keep that in mind when reading. Biddy is just one of the softest, sweetest boys ever. I love him and he needs to be protected at all costs. It's okay that he can't take a hit because he shouldn't have to. On top of that, there's little bits of mental health represented in this story, and all of the side characters throughout this are so supporting and wonderful. I love this book so much. It's just such a joyful read. Also, may I just say, Shitty Knight has my heart. Yes, his name is Shitty. You heard me correctly. Unsurprisingly, I gave both of these 5 stars. They are basically comfort reads for me now. After that, I also read Wolfsong by TJ Klune, and this is the first book in his Green Creek series. Also read this as a part of the Romance-a-thon reading vlog. I read this in 2 days. Majority of that taking place until 2 a.m. one night, and I had to go to work the next morning because I was just so sucked into the story. I couldn't stop. I think I was probably crying in this more than I've ever cried in any other book. It's so angsty, but at the same time, this has one of the best found families ever. All of the characters in this are vivid and realistic. I love that each of them have actual personalities and so much depth to them, but it also makes sense when you think about the fact that many of these characters get their own books further into the series. Oh, and the development of said characters also, particularly in this first one, 𝗖cie. I love how we can see him grow up. We follow him throughout 15 years of his life, and we really see how he matures over time, specifically in the writing, which I thought was really interesting for TJ Klune to showcase. We first meet 𝗖cie at the beginning of the story. He is 9 and his father has just recently left him. Majority of the writing surrounding him then is very simple in terms of word choice and sentence structure, but as the story progresses and he matures, the writing reflects that as well. Not just in his maturity either, also in his confidence. And I haven't actually given you a real synopsis. Have I? No, I haven't. This story is following 𝗖cie, and he lives in Green Creek. He eventually meets this family named the Bennetts and is welcomed with open arms. He ends up making friends with the youngest son, Joe, and I'm just gonna leave it there. The love story in this was childhood friends to lovers, and not really one of my preferred tropes. If I'm being completely honest, when we first met Joe, I really didn't think I could ever see him in a romantic light for 𝗖cie, but the way the story evolves over time, I was shocked to find that I was shipping them so hard by the end. It builds and builds and builds, and you just can't deny the chemistry between them anymore. Also, there's so much angst, guys. Like, I really don't think I can express to you how much angst there is without just telling you it's a lot. There's also so much healing and growing together, however, and again, when I was crying, wasn't always bad. Sometimes it was happy things. This is just a love story, but it's not just a romantic love story. It's also a love story about family, and I don't think I can eloquently just express my love for this story. I gave it 5 stars. I am now addicted, and Green Creek trash. There went my iPad. Definitely, my phone definitely like fell a little. After that one, I read the second book in the Dark is the Night series by Kelley York and Rowan Altwood. I loved this because it's so like the first book, but also so not. Whereas the first book is in James's perspective, this one is actually in William's. It is a few years later, and the two boys are living together and working as mediums, essentially, but also kind of ghost hunters, while James is very much a cocky, smug you-know-what, William has enough anxiety for the both of them combined. He really struggles in his confidence, and he is still relying on his laudanum from the first book. In this one, we're really able to see how he struggles with his addiction and actually how it is starting to affect his relationship with James as well. This book overall just felt a lot older and more mature, and the issues that the boys faced felt so much bigger, which I think showcases the time difference between the two books, and I really liked that. I can't help but grab onto every little moment that takes place between them and just like hold it in my heart. And like, I'm talking the littlest things, like brushing shoulders, giving each other sly smiles, because this is a historical fiction, so you know it's illegal for them to be together at this point, but they are because they're just in love and they can't deny one another, and I can't handle it. Once again, the historical background is well established, and I'm really glad for that. Obviously, in this one, there's not really as much of a dark academic vibe compared to the first, which did take place at a boarding school. I did also appreciate the numerous callbacks to the first book and the mystery that they solved, which then also showcases how they have matured as ghost hunters together. A haunted setting is super creepy and unsettling. I love that about this story because it manages to be weird and writing that line of like a fantastical mystery while also having one of the cutest dang couples I've ever read. I do think in this one I was a little bit more surprised by the ending reveal than I was in the first one, so props to the writers there. Final chapter did have me intrigued for the next book, which is going to be from a different perspective again, not being one of the boys in this main couple, but I'm also not ready to give up on these two dorks, so I went and bought the little novellas that take place between the second and third book, one of which is James and William, so that'll be further down the list. I gave this one 4.5 stars. I'm also dark as the night trash. Okay, so I gave you a little reprieve from all my Green Creek spewing. Yeah, we're back to it, because next I read Ravensong, also by TJ Klune, and this one is following Gordo from the first book, who works as Ox's boss. He is also a member of the Bennett Pack. I said the first book had a lot of angst, but my god, that was nothing compared to the drama that happens between Gordo and Mark, because oh my god, both of these men are idiots. Was I mad though? No, I wasn't. I slurped that shit up. While we had childhood friends to lovers in the first one, this one is fated mates to enemies to lovers, and like the tension there? Oh, it was good. It was real good. Unfortunately, however, the romance in this one wasn't quite as prevalent compared to the first. This did have a bit more focus on the plot that is taking place in the story, but with that, the plot definitely tugged at my heartstrings quite often. The tension between these two dumbasses, though, it's undeniable. Even though they tried to deny it. Unsurprisingly, still a good few scenes made me cry, because the plot in this one, very serious, very, very tense. But there's still plenty of comedy, because 3 of Gordo's best friends are morons. I now officially refer to them as the 3 Musketeers, and they're hilarious. They always manage to drop jokes in, often at inopportune times, but they lighten the mood perfectly. Again, found family in this, squeezing my heart constantly. Even though Gordo is a giant idiot with a rough and tough exterior, he loves so deeply and is so terrified of being abandoned. He also has some very morally gray ethics, but damn does the man have a big heart. I went with 5 stars on this one also, because favorite trope in this. Okay, and after that one, we're going right back to Dark as the Night, because I read the novella that is considered 2.8, I believe, which is back in James's perspective. This is a short little Christmas story, essentially, in which we are getting to see a bit of domesticity between James and Will. It's precious. I love it. Like I said, I just wasn't done with them, so I had to buy the book, and even though it was only 30 pages, it was enough to sustain my heart. I gave this one 4 stars. There isn't a ton going on, but damn if it's not adorable. Okay, finally, we made it to the last book, guys. Last is The Wicker King by K. Ancrum, and this was the book for the Buy Book Club this month. This is up there for one of the weirdest books I've ever read. This story is following Jack and August, and I believe, I kept mixing up names. I think it's Jack, who is suffering from hallucinations and is slowly starting to slip into them further and further, to the point where it is also starting to affect August, and the line between reality and imagination is starting to blur. At least that's what the synopsis on Goodreads would have you believe, but honestly, that line never really blurred for me. I don't think I was ever truly enthralled by the story or the world that was being created in Jack's mind to make me believe that what was happening was not simply hallucinations. I could arguably tell what was taking place throughout the book. And in the end, it's very clearly stated what's happening, but that didn't really help me figure out how I felt about this. From reading other reviews, I found out that this has a bit of a multimedia aspect, and that apparently in the physical book, as the story goes on, the pages get darker and darker to showcase how Jack is slipping into his hallucinations more and more. I think possibly if I had read it that way, I might have enjoyed it more, or at least my experience would have been a bit better. But I listened to the audiobook of this and I wasn't lucky enough to enjoy any of those elements. So hey, don't be like me, read the actual book. The characters are both odd, but they are also neglected to the point where they are officially becoming adults way too young. The relationship is kind of unhealthy, a bit obsessive. I do think that added to the mental health aspect of the story, but I don't know if I like that or not. I just, in the end, no part of me was really surprised by what's officially revealed. I just don't think this book was for me either, unfortunately. Maybe if the fantastical elements had been leaned into a little more, I may have been more convinced that the line between reality and this fantasy world was being blurred. I went with 3 stars, but it's definitely a low 3 stars. I think my Cawpile rating was actually like a 2.8. All right, that was a lot of books. Aren't you guys glad now that I pointed you in the direction of other videos for those 2 reviews? Because we would have been here for longer. I've been filming for 40 minutes. Holy crap, this is gonna take a hot minute to edit. Alright y'all, so as always, thank you so much for coming to my channel today, guys. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe down below. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!
Thank you.